always from the heart of the city, and now on demand 24/7 on the CHFI website. This is the soundtrack to accompany civilization. And I'm Don Jackson, around the world on the internet. Morris Mandel on progress, and writing in Jewish press some years back wrote, and I quote, "After several thousand years, civilization has advanced to the point where we bolt our doors and windows and turn on the burglar alarms." Unquote. He also said, all of this is going on while those who live in the jungle sleep in open huts. Some thoughts on our civilization this hour with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Al Stewart with the great Phil Kenzie on sax, and Like a Song on the radio, and Bruce Hornsby in the range, and that's just the way it is. And I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Alexandra York, in a speech some years back, said, "Unlike most heritages, Western civilization is not primarily a geographical place or genetic bloodline. It's a state of mind. No matter where one was born, to become heir to Western civilization's ancestry, one need only pledge allegiance to reason and individual liberty. The civilized values that represent the West at its best." Alexandra York in a speech. And Alfred North Whitehead said, "Civilization advances by extending the number of important operations that we can perform without thinking about them." Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Train with Drops of Jupiter, John Lennon Watching the Wheels, and Five for Fighting with Superman. I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. John Corey from My Times, published by Putnam, wrote, "Western civilization took centuries to develop the idea of childhood, but television has erased it in a few decades. What a child once learned through reading was roughly commensurate with his ability to process the information. In the age of television, however, we all get the same messages. A child of 5 and an adult of 40 can see the same images and hear the same words simply by pushing a button. It shows in our behavior. Children and adults now dress alike, talk alike, and play the same games. The concept of childhood is vanishing." John Corey from My Times, published by Putnam. The great science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke, in a speech, once remarked, "The television programs broadcast from planet Earth now occupy a volume of space more than 100 light years in diameter. I think this proves there can't be any advanced civilizations in the local neighborhood. Otherwise, the cops would already be on the way, sirens screaming across the electromagnetic spectrum." And in a related way, Bill Vaughn, defining progress in the Kansas City Star some years back, wrote, "Progress means noise. Indeed, we could pinpoint the date when modern civilization was born if we could discover when man first said, 'Turn that thing down.'" Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Seal with people asking why, and Sting, if I ever lose my faith in you. I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Thomas Merton in The Seven-Story Mountain, published by Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, wrote, "How did it ever happen that when the dregs of the world had collected in Western Europe, when the Goths and the Franks and the Normans and the Lombards had mingled with the rot of old Rome, all notable for ferocity, hatred, craftiness, lust, and brutality, how did it happen that from all this there should come the Gregorian chant, cathedrals, the poems of Prudentius, the commentaries and histories of Bede, St. Augustine's City of God?" And Billy Graham, interviewed by the late John F. Kennedy Jr. in George magazine, said, "Theology never changes. Man's heart stays the same. There have been no additions to the gospel that was preached in the first century, and there is no difference in the reading of the events of the first century. Morally, they're still the same old sins, the same old problems faced in ancient Egypt we face today." And this was an excerpt from a very old issue of Omni magazine. Kenneth Brower on the condor, a species of vulture whose population has decreased. When the vultures watching our civilization begin dropping dead, it is time to pause and wonder. Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Coldplay, Viva, Vida, and Counting Crows in a Big Yellow Taxi. And I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. This is an excerpt from a past issue of the New York Times, and I quote, "Pulitzer Prize-winning authors Will and Ariel Durant, whose lifelong collaboration produced The Story of Civilization, credited its success in part to the emphasis on achievements in art, literature, science, and philosophy, rather than on military, political, and economic events. In one volume, the Durants concluded that history is above all else the creation and recording of the intellectual, moral, and aesthetic heritage of mankind. To those of us," they wrote, "who study history not merely as a warning reminder of man's follies and crimes, but also as an encouraging remembrance of generative souls, the past ceases to be a depressing chamber of horrors. It becomes a celestial city, a spacious country of the mind, wherein 1,000 saints, statesmen, inventors, scientists, poets, artists, musicians, lovers, and philosophers still live and speak, teach and carve, and sing." Unquote. There's a great short story by Ray Bradbury about a time in the future when all art from previous generations is being destroyed. A young man finds a painting before the mob does and carries it back to a little barn where his family has taken refuge. In the moonlight, he admires the smile on the face of the Mona Lisa. It reminded me of this by Catherine Ann Porter from Flowering Judas, published by Harcourt Brace Jovanovich. The arts live on continuously, unchanged through times of interruption, diminishment, neglect. They outlive governments and creeds and societies, even the very civilizations that produce them. They cannot be destroyed altogether because they represent the substance of faith. They are what we find again when the ruins are cleared away. Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Celine Dion, In Some Small Way. John Mayer, Waiting on the World to Change. And David Gates and Bread with the classic, If. I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Andy Rooney from And More by Andy Rooney, published by Athenian, wrote, My shower first thing in the morning is a wonderfully pleasant and exhilarating way to start the day. I like the warmth. I like a good cake of soap. And I like the idea that I'm part of a civilization that has organized itself to get water to my house and have it warm and waiting for me when I get up. It's difficult to remember to be amazed every day. But it is amazing. William Rotzler has the final word with a definition this hour. To be civilized means that you know enough not to eat with your fingers. To be cultured means that you know why. Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. And CHFI.com. Good night, sweet dreams. I'm Don Jackson.